Welcome to No Boxes, Just Verses, the podcast where we go beyond the titles and the bios and explore the lessons that have shaped today's most inspiring voices and leaders and the songs that have moved them. Each week, we build a playlist of a leader's life. 5 songs, 5 lessons, 1 unforgettable conversation.
Let's put the pedal to the metal, let the top lean back. I don't know where we're going, I don't know what we're running to. I'm checking for you, how you feel about that. I think it's time we rendezvous.
And today, I am so honored and thankful to welcome Debbie Frost to our podcast. Debbie, welcome to No Boxes, Just Verses.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, let me just share with our listeners all of your amazing accomplishments, besides just me knowing you from a personal level, because we live by each other. But I want to share with our listeners what has inspired me so much about getting to know you. Debbie, you have built and run global communication organizations at 2 of the biggest tech companies in the world. These little-known companies called Meta and Google. You were vice president of international and policy communications at Facebook, was called Facebook at the time, and a member of the executive leadership team there. And you joined Facebook in its infancy, so we'll get into that a little bit. You also supported the growth of the company from 100 million to over 2 billion users around the world and handled communications for a wide range of public policy and corporate issues while you were there. But prior to joining Facebook, you spent several years at Google building the global communications and public affairs function during the company's super hyper growth years. You spent also many years in your earlier career in the UK and in Europe managing communications for companies such as Nike. And this is just really scratching the surface of your bio. Not many people are fortunate enough to work at these tech giants, let alone during their hyper scaling phases. But you've done it not once, but twice, and have had a lot of success along the way, helping to build a lot of brands. So I'm super excited for our listeners to get a sneak peek as to how you were able to do that and the lessons you learned and the lessons that you carry forward today. So Debbie, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It's sort of funny when you hear someone repeat your bio back to you, because we don't spend a lot of time, particularly as women, thinking about our careers as a capsule. And so when you take a breath and say all these companies out loud, it makes me feel quite proud of myself, honestly. That I should have you next to me at all times.
I can be your hype woman. Just let me know. I'm there. I mean, and honestly, even when I first met you, we were introduced through a friend who knew we had both been at tech companies and we knew some people in common. It was just like instantly, I felt like I had known you for a very long time. You just have that type of personality. And so I want to get into like your background and what you're doing now. But I mean, we've got to start from the beginning. Where did we can hear your accent. So I'd love for you to share with our listeners, where did you grow up and kind of how, we'll get into how you eventually got to the United States, but I'd love to know your origin story.
Yeah, happy to share anything. So yeah, I do have a bit of a mixed accent because I had an English father and an Australian mother. And I grew up in Hong Kong. So I was in Hong Kong till I was 18. But my mother died when I was really young. She died when I was 3. And my father had been very committed to retaining my connection to my Australian family. And so for the first 15 years of my life, I would spend 2 years in Hong Kong and then go and spend 6 months living with my family in Australia, which is like, this is the craziest way to grow up in the 70s and early 80s. But it was a way for him to connect me to her family and to her roots in her absence. So I sort of grew up half in Hong Kong and half in Australia, but with this English father. So I had a whole English family as well. It's very hard when people say to me, where are you from? Because I just think, oh, how long have you got?
So your schooling was in Hong Kong mostly, is that right?
Yeah.
And so you were kind of like the only person like you, I would imagine, in your schooling, or were you at an international school where there were just people from all over?
I was at a British, because at the time, Hong Kong was a British colony. And so there were British schools there. There were 4 of them. I went to one. And so we were taught under the sort of English school system, which sort of meant to path you into universities in the UK. So yeah, all of my schooling was in Hong Kong. Although funnily enough, my father, I mean, on reflection, quite a quirky individual, although he's a policeman, typically not known for their quirkiness. He just took me out of school when I was in Australia for 6 months. I just didn't go to school. I would take all these like books and stuff from my teachers, but I just wouldn't go. It's amazing I'm educated. But, I guess people did that in the 70s. I don't know. And actually, we traveled around a lot. So we traveled all around in Australia. We traveled around in like camper van. And so I've seen like so much of the world. We traveled all around Asia, all around China. Although for a long part of my youth, my father wasn't allowed into China as the Hong Kong government employee. So I didn't go till I was about 13 or 14. And then we went all around Asia as well. So it's super interesting because I spent a lot of time just sort of being a school of, life kind of person.
Which I think as we get into your journey, I think was really preparing you
Mm-hmm.
for being very comfortable in very uncomfortable situations, having to pave pathways that had never been paved at especially the companies you worked at. I think you were getting like a lesson in that when you were young and you didn't even know it, right? You didn't even know it was
It's like
preparing you.
it's like pre-wash,
Right. Right. You just had no
the
idea.
gentle cycle before you really start getting thrown around. Yeah, that was me.
Exactly. Well, this is a really interesting background. So we talked about kind of like when you think back of that period of your life, the song that you chose was, I love this song. I hadn't heard it in so long. Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves by the Eurythmics and the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. And you mentioned, look, you were raised by your father. You had a very strong presence. Your father was a strong individual in your life who I'm sure expected a lot of you, had a lot of goals for you. There was probably some pressure along the way of like what you will do, especially in the 70s, what you will do for a living and all of those type of things. And so I'd love for you to kind of walk us through why you chose that song and what it reminds you of and growing up in that kind of like household. And again, in having this global like experience of traveling like that too.
Well, first of all, I love that song. How can you not love that song? Talk about a test of time.
Right.
I love it for so many reasons. One of the reasons I love it is because it is this marriage between these like British electric 80s duo that were kind of edgy and Aretha Franklin, just something that would just felt eclectic and interesting at the time. So I didn't grow up with a lot of American music, more with like British music. So Eurythmics and that kind of stuff was very familiar to me. The reason I love it so much, though, is really it was the first song I heard where I was like, people were talking about women being able to be anything. It talks about we've got doctors, lawyers. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It didn't really talk about barriers. It talked about coming out of the kitchen and like claiming this life. So it really spoke to me because I had grown up feeling very much like there were a lot of expectations. But in this sort of way that, one's parents, and this is particularly true of my dad, in the way that they are hoping so much for you and putting on all this pressure at the same time. Because he was like, you should be a lawyer. Because I have a half brother who's a doctor. So he was like, I want the set. I want a doctor and a lawyer. And that would be really great for me. I was thinking, gosh, sounded good. You don't really realize that inadvertently what he's telling me is you can be anything you want. He just never talked about the barriers. He just made me feel like the only barrier was how hard I wanted to work or how interested I was or what I chose to do next. He never talked about, things that people inadvertently say, particularly to young women about career choice, where you think, oh, well, how will you, even young girls, we say to them, oh, well, how are you going to balance being a chef with the needs of a young family? So it really it can be very off-putting. I just never had that experience. And so it was a sort of an interesting lesson early that I didn't realize I was learning, which is that it was all about like, you can and you will do anything that you want. And the song just really encapsulated that. Its energy, the soulness of it. Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, no, it really does. I mean, and to this day, like you said, you put it on, it's an anthem for exactly what you're talking about. You feel so empowered. And it's the type of song where you put it on and like if you're having a bad day, who would like not smile from hearing that song, right? You just
Hmm.
instantly smile. So I loved that you picked that on. So okay, let's move on to like kind of your this next stage of your life. You have thought about going to law school, which let's talk about like this career path that you were going to follow. And
Yeah.
then you suddenly make an about change to do something different and how that was met in your family, but also you kind of felt the courage to stand up for yourself. So I want to understand like this period of changing course and having all these uncertainties about whether that would even be successful. The song is Free by Ultranate. And I had to look that one up. I wasn't familiar with it by name, but I'd heard it before. Like I couldn't
Hmm.
have told you the name of the song. And I was like, oh, I've heard the song before. So
Yeah.
explain like why that song and this period of changing courses in your life.
I left Hong Kong and I went to university in England. And obviously, our university school system in Britain is different to the US. And so I went straight from doing my A levels into studying law. And so I went to a 3-year law school. So I'm on that path where I'm like feeling like I'm delivering on this expectation of being this lawyer. And look, going to law school is, as you know, is like one of those things where it just sort of teaches you how to think. But I just got the feeling that this wasn't for me. And as I went through it and studied I went to quite a sort of a little bit of a left wing university. And I say, look, everything's pretty left wing in England compared to America, but it was more socialist. We studied a lot more kind of interesting socialist policy stuff. And as I was going through, I realized that what ends up in a court of law that's really interesting is really also decided in a court of public opinion. And that's what got me thinking was that really optics around laws and policies and how they affect people and how they intersect with media was just this lightning rod for me. I just felt really interested and excited about that element. And so it took a minute for me I applied to go to a bunch of different law firms and it was very half-hearted and I was very late. And that was probably a strong signal that I was seeking something else. So I also applied to a bunch of PR firms and they don't take graduates that often, but I got into one which is well known for its crisis communications and public affairs.
But wait, how did you even know to apply to do that? Like what told you, oh, I'm going to apply to PR firms?
I think there were a lot of big cases where you read about the law, but you also read the impact of the law, the change, the extension, the case, and all of that plays out in the public. There are a couple of things that happened around. I was studying sports law. I read the Taylor Report, which is all about football stadium safety. Sounds really boring, but actually it prompted a bunch of legal changes after a catastrophe that had happened during a football match. And it was a very, very tragic, well-known moment in English football history. So high profile, public, lots of news directly affected how people felt about their national sport and the safety of crowds. And I thought, God, this is so interesting. But it wasn't the law part that interested in me. It was, how does this all come together? How do you keep people safe? How do you give people the feeling of safety? What does this mean for football? What does this mean for the football club, the stadium? I just went off on this huge tangent. And it turned out that actually a lot of the firms and consultants that were sort of in the periphery of the legal aspect were people who were redesigning stadiums or thinking about how to tell crowds to be safe or it's like that whole transition everyone made to like having small bags or clear plastic at concerts is that really this is about making people feel safe and at home in large crowds. Anyway, long story, but it was one of the moments that I can think back to that made me think law isn't really just about law. It's about its impact on humanity and people. And I'm really interested in that.
Like, did you know anybody who had been working in communications or PR? So you just kind of went in it cold, believed in yourself, and applied for this position?
No context. I wanted to do crisis management. I thought that's kind of, I don't really remember how part of that old lady brain kicking in maybe, but I really don't remember why I thought of it. You know, originally when I thought about law, I thought, okay, I want to be the person that's dragged out of bed in the middle of the night to defend someone, or down at the courthouse. And I thought to myself, maybe it's just too much television, maybe it's too much LA law, I don't know. But it was one of those things where, as I thought more about a career in law, I couldn't see the breadth of it. I just wanted to do the bits that I thought were the ones that had an impact on policy and politics and people. And that area just interested me so much more. And being a lawyer in that kind of public policy sphere just didn't interest me that much. I thought, well, if there's a malfunction at an airport, or God forbid, a plane crash, your lawyer thing is way down the road. What happens in that moment is actually more interesting to me, although really it is in large part about laws and parameters and safety and things that like are law tangential. But I just found the actual law part too boring.
So you were basically channeling your inner like Kerry Washington scandal type of job before there was a scandal TV show. Like you knew you liked the law, but not enough to like, you're like, you're completely right. As you know, I'm a lawyer. You're completely right. By the time the lawyers get involved, it's like, it's been handled and happened. And now we're like litigating something that's in the past, as opposed to like fixing the crisis management. Like, I get what you're saying right then. And so like, how did that, A, again, the song, why the song, and B, how did your dad think? What did your dad think about that?
Well, the song for me is an anthem in part because it coincided with the building of my love for house and EDM music, right? Which I just hadn't really encountered until I lived in England. So at the time, so it's really like a house anthem, which definitely deserves a place on my playlist no matter what. But this one in particular, because of the timing, because during that time, and even since, when I hear that song, I think about the courage it took to take this risk, because I felt like I was going to let everyone down. I felt like I was going to have to explain to my dad that I didn't want to do this thing that I've been talking about for years and years and years, or maybe he had. It just took a lot. It took a lot to say, I'm going to do this. His reaction was not good. It wasn't great. And in fact, even until I worked for Nike, which was like 3 years after I left college, he would still refer to me as his failed lawyer daughter, which is really not awesome. It's not.
No, not the
no.
failed. That's horrible.
The failed lawyer. He would just say, he would introduce me to people that way. So not that awesome, but he just didn't have the context. He didn't know, people didn't know PR firms. They didn't know public relations or public policy. So it's not this very nascent kind of thing. Like you said, pre-scandal, pre-West Wing, people didn't see the background people that much. So although he had heard of the firm that I worked for, he had no idea what I did. He just had no idea what I wanted to do and what my career was. But when I hear this song, I think about holding on to the thing I believed in and breaking free. There's a lyric in the song that says, you've got to live your life and do what you want to do.
I got to tell you, because like I said, I listened to the song and I was like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. It also, growing up with a similar, very strong-willed father, wanted me to go to law school. I did it. I worked as a lawyer. I'm not going to say I loved it, clearly, because I'm not doing it anymore.
Right now,
it wasn't my passion. But I don't regret the critical thinking, like helping you to be a critical. Like I certainly don't regret that part of it. I don't regret some of the earlier years and just it teaching me how to be a professional. But the more you've spoken and listening to that song, it also made me think kind of around that same area. Remember that song, Free, Free, Set Them Free? Remember that song?
Free, free,
set them free. I remember when I was kind of deciding I don't want to do this. That song was playing in my head. I was like, I'm about to be free.
I feel like law school does this to people, Yeah.
But I'm telling listeners, if your kids want to go to law school, they should go. We're not saying don't do it. I just think it's got to be for you. I know people who've been, you do too, been practicing 40, 50 years and they still love it. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a certain type of person.
It's the critical thinking. It exposes
Yeah.
you to so much, from business to politics to society to family. I think the intersection of law across everything we do in life is going to law school gives you that exposure, gives you that critical thinking, gives you that ability to see the field. And that's what it gave me. I was like, actually, there's all this other stuff going on around these critical issues, and I want to be part of them in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all needed for the ecosystems. But I just wanted to make sure that you and I shared that moment because we had so much in common. I was like, yeah, I hear a free song all the time too.
Right? Yes, exactly. Exactly. I wonder how many times women go through what we went through, feeling external pressure, feeling like you have to advance your career, do things the right way, take the right steps, go to the school, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden we have a sort of break free moment. And I just wonder if boys feel the same way.
I think it's a different pressure. I think it's a different pressure because if you follow a stereotype, there's the pressure to be the provider. And there's the pressure to be the provider. You got to do these like 5 things. And if you don't do these 5 things, you're not going to be a good provider. So I think that it's a different type of pressure, and they want to be free too. It's a different type of freeing.
Maybe you and I just got lucky. Maybe you and I just had like stronger will.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Okay, so let's get into like, now you've made this change and like your dad was disappointed, but he clearly, the success you've had, I'm sure he has gotten well over that. Like he had to get well over that.
Yeah, he came.
He'd had to come with a career like yours. You absolutely have to come around. And so let's go into this third stage kind of your life. You were doing, and like I know this all so well, you're doing the grunt work. It's the early stages of your career. You're really trying to figure out, there's probably days where you're like, did I make the right decision to do this? Like, but then there's days where you're like, I absolutely made the right decision to do this. And you're just really, you're going through a lot of new lessons very early on in your career. You picked Ray of Light by Madonna, a song that I literally haven't heard in a million years. So you brought me back. At first I was like, Ray of Light by Madonna. Oh yeah. Well, I haven't heard that song in, 20 years. Like it's been a long time. I get the meaning of Ray of Light. What was your Ray of Light? Like help me through how that time worked for you.
I think the song invokes a feeling of like flying, of like spreading your wings and feeling sure, or finally feeling at home in your skill. For me, it's that lesson of finding my own secret weapon, or what I thought was my secret weapon. Probably wasn't very secret, but I had started working at the PR agency and I worked for a bunch of clients. And of course, I'm like young. And so I'm getting all this like what I thought was just like ridiculous work to do. I was like, I went to law school, I'll have you know. And yet there I am carrying bottles of shampoo around Condé Nast, handing it out to beauty journalists.
I so relate to that early in my career when I was doing something like, oh my gosh, you want me to go do what? You want me to meet somebody? I got to wait here for 5 hours? Like literally, I went to law school for this? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I went around these factories. But in my early career at the PR agency, one of my big clients was a client called Unilever. They do a lot of consumer goods. They also, at the time, they later sold this part of their business off, but they had a really, really giant European frozen foods business. Before all your listeners doze off, this is a funny story because I had this moment where I was working for Unilever as a client and I used to take journalists around their factories and they used to make fish fingers, which I think in America is called fish sticks. Don't ask me if I've eaten one because after I tell you the story, you'll realize I haven't eaten one in like 30 years. So they had this big fish stick business, huge business. But at the time in the 90s, when Britain was joining the European Union, they had to change all of the labeling on packaging to meet the European requirements. So this is exactly what I mean about where law and safety and people and policy all intersect. So all of a sudden there's these huge labeling law changes. I know it sounds very boring, but in order to meet the European requirements, companies like Unilever had to figure out how they were going to say what was in some of their products. It was a big deal. And they had this whole thing about, we want to be able to say that it's 100% fish. It's like, well, some of it's fish and most of it is parts of fish, but it was, no one wants to read that on the box, right?
Right.
So it was this moment where even though I was very early in my career and I didn't really know much about anything, because I'd been to the factories, because I'd explained it to journalists, because I understood the array of different offerings of different types of fish sticks that this company had, I was just like a different person in the meetings. I knew how to find words to help them describe what they were selling that complied with the law, gave people full transparency as to what they were eating, how mums could serve healthy fish meals to their children. I could think about all of this stuff. I just got it. I was like, oh, I know what has to be done. And so the song reminds me of feeling like I know how to do this. This is what I do.
Yeah. You had found your passion. You were good at it. And now it was time to soar. It was like, okay, this is what we're about to do.
And let's go. Let's move fast. And the song it's an upbeat song. And it talks about she's flying faster than a ray of light. And I just when I think about that song, I think about figuring out, actually, I'm good at this.
Made the right move. And now it's time to
not do fish sticks. Yeah.
Well, not do fish sticks, but grind. Now it's time to get out there and really grind and go take this to the next level. And boy, did you do that. Because what comes up next, I'd love to understand the story of how we get from here to Google, and then from Google to, at the time, Facebook, obviously now Meta. We talked about this as being your rocket ship years. I mean, we're talking about blasting off, baby. And the song is Titanium. And I did not know this song at all. So thank you. I did not. So thank you for adding this to the playlist. So explain to us a little bit more about those years and why this song.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this feels like the meat of all the years. So I got married and my ex-husband was living in America and he said, why don't you come? And I mean, I guess that's what you do when you get married, right? You have to live together.
I think so.
I was like, okay, yeah, living in Amsterdam wasn't working for either of us. So I left my job at Nike, which I loved. I really loved. I had been there nearly 4 years. I'd worked through the Olympics. I'd worked on a lot of really interesting issues around their labor issues in Asia. I'd worked and met a ton of really interesting athletes. We're trying to grow their European business and find Nike a home in European sports. So I've been doing all this really interesting work. Anyway, gave it all up, moved to America, but it was 2001 and the economy wasn't great. Although I personally had thought, well, with my experience at Nike, I'm sure to get a job at Levi's or Gap or one of the, sort of big apparel companies that are based in San Francisco, no one was hiring. And so I ended up having to sort of think more about what it is that I do for companies. And really at the time, what I could do for companies was I could help American companies internationalize or build their sort of global expansion. So I ended up applying for communications roles that had that. And I got this job at this very small tech company, and that company was Google. This was 2002. Then you just get hit with a wall of tech, right? Where you move from what felt like Nike felt like a kind of interesting, fast moving corporate environment. And you get thrown into this very, very different kettle of fish. So I was there 4 years. I worked on bringing Google to the world, opening different offices, launching the website and the advertising offerings in languages and countries, and going around the world with Larry Page and Sergey Brin and getting the company ready for IPO. And then in my later years, working on getting Google into China. So all of these like issues were like super interesting. But I didn't stay there after my work on China. So early 2007, I left and I was going to take some time off. But a dear friend of mine who I'd worked with at Google was going to another startup. Her name was Sheryl Sandberg. And she said, you should come and do this other company with me. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. I thought, how is this company is so behind because MySpace is killing it.
I mean, you just dropped like 3 tech royalty names. These are just all people. Like you're just like, oh yes, I'm just working with Larry and Sergey. And then like Cheryl calls me.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
that's
wow,
what
Debbie.
I mean. But thank you. It does feel wow when I reflect back, and that's part of what is helping me explain my love for this song, because the stakes were just getting higher and higher and higher. And in the middle of all of this, in 2008, which I refer to a bit like the Queen as my annus horribilis, Latin for horrible year, 2008, my husband walked out and 10 days later, my father died. So it was just awful. And I had just started my new job. It was a lot. And I was just dealing with so much. And, you know, the separation and ultimate divorce, the death of a man who I'd had such conflicted feelings with, and this new job with loads of pressure and all these people. And so the song reminds me of this found resilience, like looking into the abyss or like finding your nadir, where you're like, I could not possibly get any lower and things are still coming at me. I must be made of steel. And so when I hear this song talks about being bulletproof. It talks about getting up over and over and over. It's also, again, it's house music, which I love. And Sia is Australian. She's an Australian singer. And so there's just so much to love about it. And it takes me back to this time where I just thought, I just have to keep going because the hits just keep coming. I don't have time. I don't have time to grieve, or I don't have time to do anything else but just take one step at a time. So it's over a period of years, but the work was intense. My personal life was very intense. And that's hard. It's hard.
Do you think that because, you know, there's so many life events, I think there's 4 or 5 major life events, you went through 2 of those 4 or 5 within a span of, let's say, a week or 2 of each other. Do you think that having joined Facebook at the time had to be completely chaotic? Do you think that you were able to, I'm not going to say you got over the grief, but you were able to like compartmentalize it a bit because you were in such a, like, you're in your professional life, it was just so kind of just crazy that like you didn't have time to even like really deal with what was going on. Like you had to eventually deal with it, I'm sure. But at the time you could just be like, I can't even deal with that because I just got all this chaos over here.
Right. I did feel like that. It did feel like that. I also think that I had my first experience where I had a woman boss, Cheryl, and I hadn't really experienced someone like her who was able to tell me, you know, I care about you, you're important, your job is safe, you got to look after you. You know, she had like a different perspective on how people, especially women, brought their whole selves to work. I'm sure she did. She wrote a whole book about it. But it was one of those moments where long before the book was even a twinkle in her eye, I got to experience a person who said, look, all of this stuff is going on in your life, and even 50% of you is enough. Just show up when you can.
You had an empathetic leader in a time where you really needed empathy on steroids.
I did.
So we'll get out of the late 2000s. Now we're starting to get into the 2010s, if you will. Facebook is growing and growing. It's not Meta yet. It's still Facebook, right?
It wasn't Meta until after I left. So I left in 2019. So yeah, it was became Meta shortly after.
You're at Facebook and you guys are growing at like ridiculous clips. Tell us a bit more about where you are as a leader, as a journey, you know, and eventually because I happen to know you, you find love again.
Yes, I do. Gosh, it's so funny that you bring that up. Yeah, I mean, look, that was 2008, 2010. We're like, everything's getting busy. The company's successful. We're again preparing for IPO, doing a lot of expansion. But I talked a lot when we started talking of seeing this interest in where like humans and policy and law and society all mesh. Well, nothing was more sort of at the center of that or epitomizes that than that work at Facebook because it mattered to everyone, everything we did as a company. And all of these issues we were dealing with were they just felt brand new. No tech company had ever dealt with them before, or at least not at that scale. Things around controversial content and what people were sharing and how people built their sort of online presence. I mean, we don't even think about it today because everyone has like 3 different socials. But at the time, people were just starting to figure out what they wanted to do. And I remember I have like all these like crazy stories. I remember someone coming in and they were saying, we need to come up with a better policy around gore. And I was like, well, that sounds like a challenge. But it was because the Mexican drug cartels were posting photos of beheadings on Facebook. I mean, it just seems crazy. I remember there was wild criticism about the fact that this content existed at all. And you have this moment where you have to think about visuals and reporting and how, I mean, I think about the terror of war photo, the photo of Napalm Girl running naked out of her village in Vietnam, like award-winning Associated Press photographer. And it's just an incredibly important lesson that I had to think through when we were talking about our new gore policy, because these things have a value because people are starting to see a very dark and horrible thing. But if you bury it, what good is that? So the conversations that we were having weren't really about, how many photos people wanted to post or who wanted to be friends with who. They were really at the cutting edge of, are we doing the right thing? What makes sense for our service? What makes sense for people? How can we make sure that we're keeping people's ability to say what they want and share what they want without offending or upsetting or causing any real world harm? And that was from what I wanted to do as a kid. There was no conversation that I had wanted to be in more than any of those.
I mean, I feel like your background was like made for it. So all the schooling, all the years, all the time spent was like now made for this intersection of kind of law and policy and communications and crisis management. It's like all of your experiences came together. And it's a lot of times when we are getting these experiences, they could seem desperate, like they don't go together. And then there's like an epiphany that shows that they actually, like, you are the right person for this type of moment in this type of company in these type of issues. So I think it actually came together. You just could have never planned it. Like you could have never been like, this is my pathway that I'm going to go to school with.
That's right. You mean like, so I can prepare for this moment? People are going, people would have said that's crazy. People aren't going to share stuff about themselves online and do businesses and, post pictures of their babies and that's insane.
And literally that's the big part of why I started this podcast, because the leaders on here have not been boxed. They've just tried and done so many different things to be successful. And this is the epitome of like exactly what this show is about. And so you're dealing with such groundbreaking issues, even to this day, as we have all kinds of different things going on online. There's TikTok, there's all kinds of stuff going on online. But a lot of the things that you guys worked on, the policies that you guys set, still carry on today. You got to be incredibly proud of like your part of that history.
I am incredibly proud. I take a lot of it for granted in a way, and sometimes have to stop myself to remember, this one thing in particular stands out as an example. How we all have a device in our pocket that is more powerful than the first computer that sent, the first astronaut to the moon. But the way we deal with it is we scroll like a feed. Everything is a feed. Well, Facebook was one of the first services when it moved to mobile that became a feed, and people were really mad. They hated it. Yes, we had something like a third of our users were in a Facebook group called Bring Back Old Facebook because they didn't like the feed. They wanted to go to the old style navigation where when you logged in, you were on your own profile and then you navigated around to different people's profiles. This is back in 2000, 2009. Newsfeed just changed all that, but it also changed the way we use phones. So having been around for some of those things, it's just obviously an incredible journey to have been on. And sometimes I can't believe I really did it all.
No, you definitely did it all for sure. And before we go on to the next phase, as we kind of finish with your Facebook days, you were I know you are aware that there's been a book written, Careless People. And in it,
I read it.
I read it too. And there's a person you worked with, a colleague, who has written kind of I think what the press has called a tell-all book. The press has called her a whistleblower. And I guess what I will say is look, we've both worked in tech. We've worked at really big companies. We've worked with some iconic people. And it's just one of those things where, as I thought about this, when you're in the trenches and you are creating new territory, scaling new industries, new technologies, it's all unknown. And you're working really closely with people. We've gotten to the stage now where these things now become Netflix and Hulu specials. And I just putting myself back to 2010 or 2005, I guess I never would have imagined that some of these are hard jobs and hard decisions that you're making that impact billions of people, that somehow a conversation I had with the person next to me would be on the front of the Wall Street Journal. Because here's the reality, you have days when you're on your good side, you have days when you're on your bad side. Thank goodness I didn't have Facebook. A lot of us say, I'm glad there was no Facebook around when I was a teenager type of thing, because you just don't know how things can be taken out of context. And so what I will say is I'd love to just give you a moment to address anything you want to about that book. But it is just an interesting, for me, my take on things is just we're in a really weird space where you're trying to be out there changing the world. And do you really have to also now be cautious of all your interactions with anybody and everybody that you interact with and you work with because of 5 years from now, this could be like a Netflix special. I don't know. It's just kind of a weird, sad commentary to me.
I've been thinking about that too, actually. And look, I've read the book. And the thing I would say is that it is hard to see your private texts, emails, things you said suddenly appear used, without your knowledge or consent. I mean, that's just always hard. It just feels weird. I think it's even harder to see things like that used to portray such a sort of distorted view, kind of divorced from the reality that I saw. So that's hard too, although I appreciate that everyone's perspective is different. I mean, look, I come off really well in the book. I think I sound really funny. So, kudos to Sarah for using some of my really funny moments. But I would say, before we get into the obvious discussion of who's going to play me in the miniseries, that it makes me sad because I really cared for the author. Sarah was a good friend of mine. I mean, there's part of the book where she talks about waking up in the hospital after a very dangerous childbirth, and I'm sitting by her side. And so actually that is the kind of relationship we had. It's hard to reflect on a friendship that doesn't exist anymore when you read a book. So that made me particularly sad. But I think you hit on something, Shannon, which I think also we should be worried about, which is that, and I think about it this way, there are a lot of big companies out there, including ones that you and I have worked for, where they are founder-led or now CEO-led, and you have a small advisory or executive team around that person. And my fear with books like this, or, that don't, I mean, I don't know if she really blew the whistle or anything, but is that it will cause people in leadership positions to seek less advice, to surround themselves with smaller teams, to trust fewer people, to ask for less opinion, not more. And I think that is a very dangerous place to be. I would want people to expand their sphere of influence in leadership roles, seek more opinion, diverse opinion, and not surround themselves with small circles of trust. So my hope would be that the lesson from tell-alls or whistleblowers is not to bunker down or batten down the hatches, but to listen to your critics and continue to take a broad slice of advice. But my fear is that books like this don't help.
Well, thank you for that. Let's move on. Let's get into kind of where you are now. Again, I alluded to before, you found love again. You've left Facebook. You've gone on to do some other things with Cheryl and helping other organizations and women's groups and things of that nature. So I'd love to kind of hear about where you are now, both in your personal and professional journey. And the song you picked was Kings and Queens by Ava Max.
Such a fun song and probably a good way to end. I did find love again. I married Mike in 2014 after being with him for a few years. So we've been married for a while now. And he's someone I've known, a really long time. So I knew him when I worked at Google, and we worked together briefly during my time there. I feel like he's been my friend and my best friend for a really long time. So it's nice to be married to your best friend. We both don't work now. I left Facebook in 2019 and I spent a little bit of time consulting, in particular, working a lot with Cheryl on her Lean In Foundation. And the work they do has always been very special to me. I helped Cheryl launch her book internationally when I was at Facebook. And we often did a lot of work around Lean In when we were in different countries. Sometimes we would take time, or I would take my own personal time and she would take her personal time, and we'd go together and try and talk about some of the concepts from the book in different places. And I always think fondly of that. So I worked for her foundation as an advisor for a few years, super interesting work. Now I'm also on the board of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is a cause very dear to my heart. And so I've been sort of pivoting away from, the sort of traditional communications and policy work, and trying to think more about my philanthropy and how to use the privilege of not having to work or need to be paid to continue to help and support causes and people and things that I care about. So that has largely been women and women in the workplace. I also am an advisor to a feminist writer and journalist, Marianne Schnall, who she writes for Forbes and a bunch of other places. But she also wrote a book in 2013 called What Would It Take to Make a Woman President? So she's a really interesting writer. She owns feminist.com. And so I'm actually sort of working with her right now and trying to think through what feminism looks like in 2025 and beyond. So I'm going to come in for you for some thoughts. So yeah, I try to keep busy and do things that I think continue to support women. Look, I had a lot of women support me along the way. I'm always grateful for that. And I'm always looking for ways to pay that forward. What can I do for women that women did for me? So that's kind of where I am. And that's why the song, I think, encapsulates that. There's two things I love about it. One is that it's sort of a call to action for men to support their queens, which I think is super important and a good message more than ever. But it also talks about what the world might be like if women had the same opportunities, respect, leadership positions as men, and wouldn't the world be more harmonious and more celebratory, and wouldn't we just be coming together more? And I can't help but think about that every day. So it's a really fun song, but it really says a lot about the kind of work and the kinds of things that I'm drawn to now that my corporate career is over.
Well, you're just starting I feel like it's just a new chapter. We won't call it career, but it's a new chapter where you're taking all of these things from your journey and you're putting it together to causes that really will be impactful globally. And you're really lending your time and your expertise to that. So I always say to people, it's not like the people that I know that, especially where you and I are, we're around a lot of people who are in their 70s and their 80s and have had amazing careers. They're still grinding on something, right? They're still working
Oh,
hard
yeah.
on something, but this time in their season of life, it seems like it's like what's most impactful to changing the world. That's what I see when I talk to you and all the amazing things you're working on. You're still out there trying to change the world. That never changed for you. It's just different vehicles to do it. So, well, listen, your playlist has literally, thank you. It has been amazing. And before we close up, I always ask my guests, if we're driving down the highway together and this song comes on, what is that song that just put a smile on your face?
Oh, gosh. It's well, Shannon, I just got back from Ibiza, right? So I know we've just been having this like long conversation about my corporate career, but I have literally been clubbing in Ibiza for like 2 weeks with my
I
friends.
love your life.
So,
I love your life.
yeah, well, it's a great life, but also I haven't done that since I was in my 20s, and so it's so fascinating to like experience this kind of like really fun energy, very liberating, and then to talk to you about my early life. So actually, I've been listening to a lot of like 90s house music recently. And I'm going to say a bunch of songs to you, and you're going to be like, I don't know what that is because I don't hear it on the radio that much. But I think if I hear like 90s house music or even 80s music, that always puts a smile on my face. I think one of the ones that is springing to mind is a
Mhm.
song. It's from the 80s, Just Can't Get Enough by Depeche Mode.
Just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. I love
Exactly.
that song.
And so, maybe it is one of those things which is just about this having like endless energy for stuff. And I feel like that's one of the things I love about you is that you're like just nonstop. You have all this amazing energy. And I can't thank you enough for spending some of that energy on me.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? It's been a pleasure to spend this time and really share again your journey because I'm really trying to bring more of these amazing journeys in ways that people have never heard them. And the playlist is just, I mean, you know how much I love music and I think in music in ways that like all
You're
kinds of
always
people could
bopping,
connect.
always bopping
Always
you,
bopping. I
always
really
bopping.
am. I really am. I'm going to use that. Always bopping. I also wanted this to be so, dare I say the word diverse, but diverse in the sense of people from all over. I have, this
Mm.
season, I have people who have grown up all over the world, who live all over the world. Some of them don't even live in the US anymore. And the musical playlists that have driven them, I think there's just a lot around that and their leadership. And I think music unites us all. So your playlist, I am sure well, I mean, even me prepping for this show and listening to your playlist brought back some songs I knew that I hadn't heard in ages. And I was like, wow, I like that song. And some songs I'd never heard of. And so that
Good.
is the point is to leave with some amazing lessons in your journey and a playlist that I will never forget. And so I
Oh,
feel like not only have we accomplished this, it has been such an honor to have you sharing your journey with us. So let's recap your 5 songs really quick. First was Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves by the Eurythmics and Aretha Franklin. Next up, we had Free by Ultra Nate. Third, we had Ray of Light by Madonna. Fourth, we had Titanium by David Guetta featuring Sia. And last but not least, we had Kings and Queens by Ava Max. What a playlist. Oh, and as an honorable mention, we had Just Can't Get Enough by Depeche Mode, which is definitely a banger. I can't wait to share your playlist with our listeners. And your story is just so incredible. People say that you can't follow and chase your dreams. I've heard people say that. You are the epitome of somebody who followed and chased their dreams unapologetically. You hit lightning more than once at these rocket ship companies. And in it all, you were able to help other people and you continue to help, particularly helping to raise the profiles of other women. And I just admire all you're doing. And if our listeners wanted to follow you and support you, where would they be able to find you?
The easiest place to follow my life, I put a lot of my personal stuff on Instagram, which is just at Deb Frost. But if your listeners want to see some of the great work that I'm most interested in, it would be good to follow the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I'm on their board. I'm probably too heavily involved in helping them right now, much to their annoyance. I'm one of those board members. Like always got their nose stuck in, but I think the work is too important and I'm doing my best to support them. And so if any of your listeners are curious about their work, then they're very easy to find. Website and social, National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing that work. So much more is needed, I know. Debbie, thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for being on No Boxes, Just Versus.
Thanks for asking me.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to No Boxes, Just Versus. And if this episode moved y'all, please share it, rate us, follow the show on your favorite platform, and we can keep building our leadership playlists together. So you can find me, guys, on Instagram as Shannon Nash1 and No Boxes Just Versus on Instagram. You can also find me on LinkedIn as Shannon Nash ESQ CPA. You can also find No Boxes Just Versus on LinkedIn. You can visit our website at noboxesjustversus.com. Finally, don't forget to check out the show notes. The show notes are super important because this is where the playlists will live. You will be able to get these playlists on Apple and Spotify. You'll also be able to follow up and see how to reach out to the guests, follow them, and support them. Until next time, I need you to stay unboxed. You come for the stories, but you stay for the playlists. I'm Shannon Nash, and I'm out.